this because I thought Evie Sage would wear this. This weekend I was glued to my chair. Why? This assistant to the villain. I have been anxiously awaiting this book for over a year now, and it is a debut. The power of TikTok strikes again. A long while back, the author of this book started this little TikTok series where at the very beginning she would say, "This is what I think it would be like if I was the morally great fantasy villain's personal assistant." And she would do these cute little installments, like mini episodes, where we get to see the villain slowly fall in love with his assistant. It's very much a like grumpy sunshine trope. Evie Sage is our main character. She's a bubbly, optimistic 20-something who is the sole provider, which now only includes herself, her younger sister, and her father, who is pretty sickly. She has a brother who we know died tragically. Her mother has mysteriously abandoned the family. Evie is in the forest when she gets caught up in a tangle of king's guards and a man who we are introduced to as the villain, proper noun. Evie has a tendency to blurt out her first thoughts, so she calls him pretty and somehow ends up mentioning that she needs a job. And suddenly our ball of sunshine is working for the most feared villain in the land. She surprisingly excels at what she does. If you like the vibes of Tangled and Ella Enchanted, you will probably enjoy this. And it is also very much a slow burn. I want to say it's the beginning of a trilogy just because my brain thinks in trilogies after being conditioned by the early 2010s, but there's definitely a second book coming after this. If you have not read it, it is time for you to go. Goodbye. Go read it. Have fun. The villain basically lives in a castle, and it's hilarious because everything is sort of run as a corporate business. We get a lot of really good glimpses very quickly of things like Scatter Day, where the interns are set loose to run away from the beasts. Kingsley is one of my favorite characters of the whole book. Apparently, he is a prince turned into a frog, but he has a crown that stays put no matter what happens. He communicates by holding up little signs. He specifically has one that's like, help! We finally get to see Becky, Evie's nemesis, who we got to know very well if you watched the TikTok series as Hannah was putting it out. And then we see that Evie is not put off by the villain's evil tendencies, or that she's magically bound to him by a tattoo around her pinky. But not all is well at the corporate castle, because some of their recent evil doings to mess with King Benedict have gone awry. One of the earlier scenes, the villain is out, and Evie finds a bomb under his desk. Now, Evie borders between brave and slight recklessness, so she picks up the bomb and she starts running to get the bomb outside of the castle. And she's doing pretty good until her foot gets stuck. Luckily, the villain gets there in time. She's okay, but like he makes sure to take her home this time when normally she would walk through the forest, which means that he meets Evie's younger sister. And she asks who he is, and he's like, "Oh, my name's Tristan." And Evie's like, "You have not told me your name ever." This was also a running joke in the TikTok series where it took us so long to find out his name. So the villain needs to go to the tavern, and he asks Evie to sort of be part of his disguise in going there. But once she's there, her ex-situationship shows up and he starts making her feel bad. So when the villain walks in, Evie pretends that he is her boyfriend. This is a classic go-to move for Evie. It's important to note that both of these characters are extremely awkward. And the villain gets especially shy when Evie does some of these more forward things. He's like, "May I ask why you're clinging to me like a barnacle?" And Evie turns to like her ex-boyfriend and is like, "This is my lover." And then he starts actually choking. It is hilarious. Apparently this tavern belongs to Tristan's brother, and Tristan recognized the like watch component of the bomb as belonging to his brother Malcolm. It's not completely off base to think that Tristan's brother might have had something to do with the bomb. They don't have a good relationship, but Tristan thinks it's more likely that somebody bought the like watch component from him and then made the bomb separately, and he's hoping that he can backtrack through his brother. He says he doesn't know anything about it, but he does know that his brother is screwed. As the villain's walking away, and he's just like seeing how Tristan and Evie are interacting, he immediately knows that Tristan's super into her. He just doesn't know it himself yet. And on their way out, Malcolm says that he remembers something and that the guy who bought the watch from him had some sort of blue ink on his hands. This blue ink happens to be sold by Tristan's sister. That sort of leads to a dead end. But we do find out that the castle healer, Tatiana, and Claire were involved in the past, and they now have very complicated feelings towards one another. Since they don't really have anything to go off of, the villain sets Evie the task of finding who the traitor is within the castle, because too many things have happened that would have had to like have intel from the inside. This eventually leads us to Blade, the very flirtatious dragon trainer. He has a letter from the king because Blade's father worked for the king, but Blade definitely didn't want to work for King Benedict. We do find out through this letter that Blade is very much not qualified at all to be a dragon trainer. Evie knows that even though Blade's not a traitor, this isn't necessarily the best look, and she she tells Blade that he needs to go tell the villain or she eventually will do it for him. He promises that he will, but Evie's kind of like, you're not, the most reliable person out there. You did lie about being able to train magical beasts. So she takes the letter to give to Tristan later in case Blade doesn't. Then Tristan finds the letter in Evie's possession. He assumes the worst, that Evie is working for King Benedict, and he is so mean to her that she quits on the spot. She's so sad, but the person who is more sad is the villain. It's so funny because he keeps crying, but he won't admit to it. It's not even first person, and we still don't get an admission that he's crying. It's just he was outside and there was something in his eye and it was watering. Meanwhile, Evie's over here wondering if she's going to die because she's been led to believe that the binding tattoo on her basically releases a poison if she betrays Tristan. It actually just tells Tristan when she's in danger, but she doesn't know that yet. And then back at the castle, everything is falling apart. And we see just how essential Evie is to every operation that happens. Because Evie sort of comes across very ditzy and sort of naive, but she's good at her job. And she knows all these tiny little details and intricacies that no one else knows. But the one problem that causes him the most inconvenience is his cauldron brew, aka coffee. Evie knows he likes a crap ton of sugar and creamer in his coffee. Same. But he feels like that makes him come across very soft. So if anyone other than Evie brings him his coffee, he takes it black. And he hates it. Now, there is magic in this story. And one of our first glimpses of how it works is in some of Evie's backstory. Apparently her mom gained powers after giving birth to the youngest daughter, Lissa, because your magic appears after a very traumatic event. Between a really hard birth and also gaining her magic powers, her mother had a really, really hard time recovering. But it appears that if you don't know how to control your magic, it can become very dangerous because when she finally feels better, she takes the kids to a field to go play. She accidentally ends up making a fireball that kills her older brother. And then the mom disappeared. Right after that, her father grew really absent and ended up getting the mystic illness, which keeps him bedridden most of the time, or so we believe. We will get to that later. But it's important to note that we don't know what Evie's mom can do because the fireball seemed like a very uncontrolled event, obviously. But we do know what Tristan's power is. His shadows point out where someone is most vulnerable for attack. So I was waiting for a scene for Tristan to go back and run into Lissa and then grovel for Evie's forgiveness, but no. Evie shows back up. Tristan's just sitting there wondering, how am I gonna get Evie back? And then Evie walks in and she's like, I want my job back. And the thing is, he's so happy to see her. His reaction to this is how positively vile. But he does apologize for treating her that way, which is a big step for him. While Blade is training the dragon, he eventually takes the collar off, and on the inside we see an engraving that says, the villain will fall. And it turns out that Evie's old boss, Otto Warson, was the one who made the collar. So we're thinking maybe we need to go talk to him to see who ordered the collar, and then maybe that's the person who's the traitor inside the castle. As soon as we get to this place, the blacksmith's place, smithery, it's pretty easy to see that her old boss was a slime ball. But they're pretending they have a lot of money to sort of butter him up to telling these secrets about the collar. Evie has not told the villain why she left this job in the first place. And she's deeply uncomfortable, but the villain doesn't notice when he normally would. But he's looking around and he's seeing all these little reminders of Evie. There's little hearts taped to the window and engraving on her desk and all this stuff. And he's just thinking about how cute it is. Evie's old boss says that he doesn't know who ordered the collar specifically, he just knows that it was one of the king's guards. He's really not being any help, so Evie says that they are not going to need his services anymore. So as they go to leave, he gets pissed, and then he picks up this dagger and goes after Evie, and she starts screaming before it even touches her, because he cut her with the same dagger when she left him, and she now has a magical scar down her back. She was working under him, and he eventually decided that if her employment was going to continue, that they were going to also be in a relationship, which she did not want. So then naturally he decided to kill her as she was on the way out the door, but she managed to get away, even though she now has this scar that reacts to the dagger anytime it's close to her. Now, the villain breaks Otto's wrist for this and basically offers to kill him for her, which she says no to, but it does give us my favorite line. If there is ever a time when you decide you do not want him existing in the same world as you are, I hope you know I will enjoy destroying him. That's why we love the villains. A hero would not say that to you. Evie doesn't know it, but Tristan took the dagger and he gives it to Tatiana to see if she can undo the connection. And now immediately when this happens, is it a good idea to give anyone the dagger? Because that gives them immediate power over Evie. But we move on pretty quickly because Tristan has to go capture a gouvre. A gouv?
Givre.
What is this? I am picturing giant snake with dragon face that can breathe acid and fire. I believe it also has wings. I don't think it's just worming in the air. But I had not a single clue what a Gouvray was. And Tristan's whole goal is to just capture this one to bring in its mate. But if you capture one, the longer you have it captured, the worse the consequences are. So it starts storming really badly. They're kind of all just waiting for this second creature who is bigger and more deadly to arrive. And when it finally does, the villain's plan just like doesn't cut it basically. And Evie helps get the other Gouvray like in the underground jail situation that the villain has set up. Evie almost dies. She does get really bad burns on her hands, and she goes to Tatiana. And we have a really interesting conversation with her. And she explains when she was really young, at one of her birthday parties, when she already had her healing powers, her parents like invited all these people. But she says the reason that so many people were trying to come for her powers was because they thought she might be a core healer. She's not. But when I read this, I was like, okay, obviously we're going to be meeting a core healer. I thought that it might be Evie's mom, or it might be Evie herself, but it was not. On her way home that day, Evie sees Becky, who she doesn't realize is Becky, sneaking around in the forest wearing a Kingsguard uniform, and Evie takes off after her, full tackle. And she finds out Becky is trying to sneak into King Benedict's palace because he might have a cure for the mystic illness. It's a long shot, but it does make Evie realize that Becky also has someone with a mystic illness, her grandmother. And Evie's like, I feel like we have something in common. And Becky says, let's never speak of it again. I love that they're enemies and that they acknowledge that they're enemies. Back at her house, Evie finds an invite to go into the forest for a cure for the mystic illness, which feels like a trap, but she goes anyway because she is desperate to cure her father. Rebecca and Blade are also there, and they all sort of compare their invitations. So Evie and Rebecca both have someone with the mystic illness, and it is alluded to on the invitation that there will be a cure for it. Blade has no such indication, and he's like, I just thought that there would be free food. It's all it takes. This is meant to be an extremely fancy party, so Evie is looking gorgeous. She's wearing this long white gown that like shimmers rainbow. Becky is also looking cute, and if it wasn't confirmed earlier, it is confirmed that Blade has a crush on Becky, which is so funny because he is the source of all the trouble that happens in the castle. And Becky is like the strictest HR person to ever exist. Would love more of a subplot from them in the next book. Apparently, Tristan's father is the one who has thrown this giant party, and he is a core healer. Now, Tristan shows up and we see that he has a very, very, very strained relationship with his father. He does eventually pull Evie aside, and they sort of have a little slow dance moment. It's very cute, very lovely. But it does not last long enough because the Gouvray has escaped. The Kingsguard show up as well, and they capture everyone there. They know that they have the villain. They know the villain is there. They just don't know what he looks like. Evie, to try to get out of this situation, she pretends that Tristan is her husband. Note that Tristan is knocked out and does not yet know that Evie is playing this role. And she's screaming because he needs a healer. When he starts to wake up, to keep him quiet, Evie kisses him, and he's just like, wow, I must still be in my dream. And continues the kiss for so long. And then Evie's like, sir, we should probably get going. And that's it, folks, because there was no other kiss in this entire book. When I said slow burn, I mean the slowest of burns. And most of our crew gets out there. The only person who doesn't is Tristan's father, because they are under the impression that he is the villain. The next day, they're all talking, and Evie goes with Tatiana and Claire. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the mole is Tatiana. Because the scene leads us to believe that she is torturing Evie with the dagger, which she now has because Tristan gave her the one thing that she would need to torture Evie. Turns out no, they're just trying to experiment and see how they can get Evie to not have such a bad reaction to the dagger anymore, because it seems like it's sort of an immunity thing. So we've gone through pretty much everyone who is a named character. It's not Blade, even though he had the letter. It's not Becky, even though she had the Kingsguard uniform. And it's not Tatiana, because it turns out she was just trying to help, even though she has the dagger. And I'm like, who is the traitor here? So on page 294, Claire brings up that she, a while ago, had made an order of blue ink, which is an ink that will make a copy of whatever you've written. And she made it for someone named East Marigold. This gets Evie's attention. Claire has no idea who this is, but Evie most definitely does. When Evie gets home and goes into her father's study, she finds everything she's ever written in her notebook with this purple ink that her dad gave her. So basically, he gave her that blue copy ink and just put a couple red drops in it, knowing that she would use like a pretty purple ink for all of her notes. She writes everything about her job in that notebook. I did not guess this at all. We find out that her dad was the one who made a agreement with Otto that for, you know, the collar and stuff, he was basically giving Evie to him. Like, excuse me? Like, he literally sold his daughter. And he knew that she was gonna be in the castle when that bomb exploded, and he truly saw her as collateral damage. We find out he was never sick. The reason he, like, feigned having the mystic illness was so that it would seem normal to everyone else in the town if he was at home all day, in bed, when he was actually doing all these missions for King's Benedict as part of the King's Guard, under the name East Marigold. And the place where her father tripped up was when he would tell Evie and Lissa, like, bedtime stories. He would tell them about the night East Marigold. Luckily, Evie figured this out in time, because when she came home and her dad was still acting like he was sick, she gave him a new medicine. This new medicine was a sedative. As her dad is, like, slowly beginning to black out from the sedative, she asks him what the king wants with the Gouvrays. And all her dad manages to say is the greater good. And Evie responds, I don't want to be good. We are now officially villain Evie. Villain shows up at Evie's house because he has also just managed to figure out what's happened. Sort of in this moment of, like, extreme vulnerability of Evie being so sad that her dad stabbed her in the back slowly over many years, Tristan shares that he used to be King Benedict's apprentice, but things didn't work out and he ended up imprisoned and in solitary confinement with no windows for a very long time, and eventually his powers manifested from that and he got out, and that is how he became King Benedict's biggest rival. Evie forgets one of her notebooks that's, like, kind of sentimental when they're, like, on the way back to the castle, and she's like, oh, like, let's go back, let's get it. And they do, and they get intercepted by the King's Guard, who knock Tristan out, take him, and then she's left with Otto and 2 other guards. Now, King Benedict has told Otto that he is welcome to just go ahead and kill Evie, but she kills him first. And these 2 other guards are left. One of them turns on the other guard and kills him and runs away. I mean, her dad is in Tristan's prison, so I have no idea who this is. Unless it's, like, Blade undercover or Becky undercover, maybe, but it just seems, like, unlikely. I feel like we would have been told that, but we're not. Also, I thought at this moment that Evie was going to spawn her own powers. She didn't, but she has taken over the office. She is now basically standing in as the villain. She tells Becky that she has a plan, and to begin that plan, she's gonna need Becky to kill her. Becky's like, I thought you'd never ask. Now, I don't know what she's planning, but the king did tell Otto that after he killed Evie that he was going to need the body back. So I assume Evie's gonna be going in almost Romeo and Juliet type of thing. Oh my gosh. She's gonna go to the palace. She's gonna pretend to be dead, and Tristan's gonna see her. The revenge will be immaculate, but the heartbreak will be so strong. To top it off, we get this one last scene where she has hung Otto's head from the ceiling, which we know is a favorite decoration of the villain, who tends to put his enemies' heads up there. She's just an evil little villain, and I love it. And I am so ready for the second book. I'd probably rate this like an 8.2, 8.5 out of 10. I just had a blast reading this because it's very, like, lighthearted. Let me know what your favorite scene was in the comments and what you thought about the book in general, who your favorite character is. Mine is Kingsley, followed up by Blade, probably. Please like this video if you liked it. Click subscribe if you want to talk about more book stuff. My name's Katelyn. Thanks for watching. Bye.